our toolbox, another thing to think about. And it's called Recovery-Oriented Decisions for Relative Support, which is a mouthful. So we'll go with Reorder. So just talk a little bit about the background about why we're involving families and some of the roadblocks, just very briefly. And then we're going to do a bit of an overview of the Reorder model just to orient you all to it and think about ways to use it. And then talk about how to incorporate it into the work that we're doing. And I'm excited to share it with you because it's actually done it's really nicely done, and it runs perfectly in parallel to what we're already trained in and to the family psychoeducation manuals. So hopefully this is another strategy that will be helpful when you're engaging families. So why it matters, why we're doing engagement, why we are focusing on engaging loved ones in treatment and recovery. So participation in manualized, formal, structured family psychoeducation is obviously one of those ways to involve loved ones in treatment and recovery, but family services overall are pretty minimal. And that's for a number of reasons, things that we talk about every consultation, things that we hear every time. And I think barriers and roadblocks are on a number of levels. You have individuals in the coordinated specialty care programs who have concerns about confidentiality, or they have anosognosia, or they don't want to be a burden and ask families to come and do one more thing. You have loved ones who are a little uncertain or a little unsure about, participating in mental health treatments. There's the stigma surrounding it. They may not know what they don't know yet and where the gaps are and what they need some additional information about. And research has consistently shown over the years that there's minimal contact between loved ones or family members and a clinician in less than half of the cases of individuals diagnosed with schizophrenia. So there's a lot of room still to do some good work. And we know that when we engage loved ones and offer them some information and support, and they become, really appropriately supportive and they know what to look for, that outcomes improve for everybody involved. So not just the individual and coordinated specialty care, but for all of us, team members included. Fewer crisis calls, loved ones are feeling, more in charge and more in the driver's seat, and feeling more informed. But what if there's ambivalence or hesitation on the part of loved ones or on the part of the individual in the coordinated specialty care program about involving loved ones? How do we overcome some of those roadblocks to engagement? And this is really where Reorder comes in. So, we talk a lot about it, the importance of engaging families in different techniques. So this is just one more thing to try. We know that the schizophrenia patient outcomes research team, or the schizophrenia port, recommends shorter term interventions, at least 4 sessions in less than 6 months time. So the Reorder model fits that very nicely. And that's for when, longer term interventions aren't feasible or appropriate for a family. So, still giving them some information and support in a short amount of time still makes an impact. And we see improved outcomes, although obviously they're not quite as robust as somebody that you're engaging with for 1 to 2 years. The Reorder program, the Reorder model, can be done as a standalone intervention, and we'll talk about what that could look like, or ideally as a bridge to the longer term, more structured family psychoeducation, which is something that we all hope every one of our families engages in, but we know that it's sometimes a struggle to make that happen. And so this could be a really nice bridge, sort of a little bit of a teaser actually into what they could get doing the longer term family psychoeducation. It just allows us to do it in more of a structured way. So a bit of an overview about Reorder. It's a very brief intervention, which is the nice part. It's structured and manualized, but it is flexible. There's some flexibility in it. It promotes recovery and encourages the consideration, and that's a very important word, the consideration of involving loved ones in treatment. So success is not defined by the individual in the coordinated specialty care saying yes, or by the family members saying yes. It's really about part of recovery is even exploring the option. So the consideration of involving loved ones. And it also defines loved ones very broadly and inclusively, like we always do. So that's a nice fit as well. Primary aims of the Reorder model are to provide a recovery-oriented approach to optimizing loved ones' involvement in care, promoting recovery using a client-centered shared decision-making model, especially when it comes to thinking about involving those loved ones. And to increase the likelihood that loved ones will participate in a constructive way. So participation can look like all different kinds of things, right? And engagement can look very different. And we often hear about the two extremes. So somebody who's really disengaged, completely uninvolved, or those who are so involved that it seems to sometimes feel like they're monopolizing the treatment. And so we're helping them to figure out what engagement can really look like to be the most constructive and successful. So we're helping them figure out what's that sweet spot of family engagement. And that's something that, is different for every family, and it's something we have to figure out together, but we are the guides for family members in figuring out how to navigate and where they fall on that continuum. So why it works, it's user-friendly for us as providers. It aligns very, very nicely with coordinated specialty care for first episode psychosis. Especially, from the Raise Navigate side of things. They have the handouts, but especially the language that they use and the skills that you'll need. They're things that we already know and that we're already doing. It just provides us with some additional structure. Structured but flexible, uses a lot of rehearsals and role plays. And the really nice part, probably my favorite part that helps for clinicians who are just kind of dipping their toes into the world of family work and, maybe there's some anxiety or some uncertainty. It actually gives you some sample scripts and really kind of times out an agenda with what you're targeting, and really, really sort of structured approach in that way for each of the sessions that you will do as well. So it's laid out really nicely. It's client-driven, shared decision-making. It's a very gentle and unassuming approach, and it's not rushed, and it's manageable and palatable because of its limited scope as well, and because it's so brief. Reorder happens in two structures. In two phases. So the structure is set up so that it's an individual intervention where you work with the individual in coordinated specialty care for about three sessions. And then you will do another 3 sessions, potentially, if the individual has agreed, with an identified loved one. The very first family intervention session is done with just that identified loved one, one-on-one. And the second and third sessions can also include other loved ones and potentially the individual in coordinated specialty care, but their extent to involvement is how involved they want to be is really up to the individual. And it's 6 sessions at most with normal treatment hours, and usually occurs in, ideally it's in within a 2-month window. So it's kind of a compressed time frame. So as teams, what do we need? You obviously will need the guide, the little manual. It's very short. I think it's 48 pages, user-friendly. A lot of those are like blocked out scripts. So it's not I read it in, an hour one evening, hour and a half one evening. So you will get the guide and the manual. We have permission to share that when you get my PowerPoint slides, so you'll have access to that. And one little note is there are going to be some sections in it where you're allowed to skip. Reorder was designed to work with individuals and help Reorder could help bridge them to meet the team and work with the team. We're already doing that. We already will know these folks, the team's already involved. So there are going to be a couple of sections in there that you can skip, and I'm happy to highlight those if you're interested. You can always email me. The provider is trained. Obviously, you have some experience. You've read about the model. You have some basic understanding of MI and shared decision-making, and knowledge of barriers and facilitators. So what works and what doesn't when we're engaging families. And I think everybody in this group is pretty familiar with that one. So we won't go into these in too much detail, but I just wanted to highlight so you got a sense and a good feel for what the phases look like. So in phase 1, again, it's 3 sessions and it's with just the individual and coordinated specialty care. It starts by the provider and the individual sort of engaging in a collaborative discussion about, let's revisit your recovery goals. It's a great time to sort of revisit and reset. What are your goals for treatment and recovery? Because sometimes those are different. And how does this align or match with what matters to you? What's meaningful to you? What your values are. So it's a great way to kind of start into that discussion. And then once you have sort of an idea of what are your recovery goals, where are we going? What are you hoping for? Thinking about who, if anyone, could really help them reach those goals and in what ways. Importantly, it's discussing and validating any hesitations they have, the pros and cons, the potential outcomes of involving the loved one. So they're really making an informed decision and thinking through about all the potential outcomes. Sometimes the Ottawa decision guide can be really useful, and actually that's referenced in the Reorder model as well. The next step after you've had those initial discussions is empowering the individual to invite their loved ones if they're so inclined. So it's not us having to call to contact the individual, it's framed so that they can reach out to their identified loved one, invite them to participate. And then sometimes it's also includes helping them to advocate with involving loved ones in other aspects of their care outside of the first treatment team. So I pulled a couple of little excerpts from in here where, just to show you that Reorder really can also help with the step before that, and thinking about who those loved ones might be, what's the nature of the relationship, especially over the past 6 to 12 months, unless there are other, substantial or significant historical events, we want to know about those as well. But it talks about, if you're living with family, here are some questions that would be helpful to think through or talk through when they're making that decision. If you're not living with family, but you have contact, or if the individual is struggling to think, who could I involve? Who might really support me in these recovery goals? So it just gives us some language around that and some prompts and some questions. So that's a really nice feature of the Reorder model. I mentioned that, there's quite a bit of overlap with what we already know and what we already do. So it's not learning a whole new program or protocol. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that it runs in parallel with our coordinated specialty care work, alliance building, decisional balances, that Ottawa decision guide, values clarification. We talk about that a ton with family with CBT, problem solving, and then behavioral rehearsals or role plays. So those are some really important aspects in this phase 1 that you do with the individual. So we've had that training. We know it because of our manuals that we already use. And similar, and I'll highlight some things from the loved one portion that there's a lot of overlap with as well with what we do. So if the individual chooses to invite a loved one, and if that loved one accepts the invitation, that first session when you're one-on-one with the family member or the loved one, the focus is really on engaging them, getting to know them, understanding what their level of knowledge and comfort is with the diagnosis or with first episode treatment, and everything from their experience, their perspective. So what has your experience been like? And then after that, sessions 2 and 3, we're providing them with some basic psychoeducation, just the foundational stuff, tools, anything that can help them collaborate more effectively with the team or other providers. And then we're giving them referrals to support groups like NAMI, or if your agencies have support groups. Like I mentioned, the individual in the coordinated specialty care has the option of participating in sessions 2 and 3. Based on the level of engagement and the dynamics that are going on with the loved ones, you can kind of take 2 pathways, and it walks you through those pathways very nicely. For those who are a bit more ambivalent or hesitant or not really fully engaged yet, there's an MI sort of pathway to providing them with some information and talking about potential for engagement. And then the other pathway is more advanced education for those who are pretty engaged and pretty savvy already, so we can take them up a notch. And then those are the folks who are probably more likely to move or segue straight into family psychoeducation. So again, a little excerpt for what you can see. So just in your initial meeting, here's some language about, how to introduce, why they're here today. And I cut some of it out, but I love this one because you've all heard me say in the past, if you've worked with me, how important it is to talk about definitions and expectations early and often. And so it really gives a beautiful definition of recovery. And, are we on the same page? Is your loved one on the same page? Because that's the foundation of everything. If we're all working towards different things as we identify recovery, we're just going to end up with a lot of very frustrated individuals who are getting set up for disappointment because their idea of recovery is not being achieved. So some agreed upon definition. So I like the language, I like the script they provided. So I wanted to highlight that here. So techniques in phase 2 with the family members that overlap with our coordinated specialty care work are, again, alliance building, the importance of communication between the loved ones and the treatment team, and they're part of the treatment team, so it reinforces that. Defining recovery, discussing expectations, and also belief systems. If we don't know what loved ones' belief systems are, what they value, we oftentimes make recommendations for the individual in coordinated specialty care that work directly against their belief systems. And that puts the individual in care in a very precarious position, because who do they please? The treatment team or their loved ones. So it's very, very important to have those discussions about, where are you with treatment? What are your thoughts on medication? Importance of using summaries and restatements to kind of decrease defensiveness, make sure everybody's hearing information in the same way through the same neutral ears, rather than anything that's emotionally loaded because there's some frustration within the family. And then providing, obviously, education and support, referrals to support groups. So This is just a recap of how it fits with what we already do and what we already know. But I wanted to highlight again that it does provide, the first 10 minutes, spend time doing this with some sample scripts and language, and then goals for each session. So you can really kind of wrap your head around, what are we trying to get out of this session? And then you can share that with those who are participating. So as you can see, it's sort of like a mini version of our family psychoeducation, the brief trainings that you get. And that's for a reason. So the authors of this are major players in coordinated specialty care on a national level, specifically with On Track New York. And On Track New York has actually embedded Reorder in their family psychoeducation manual. So I put that link there so you could check it out and get a feel for how they structure it. There might be some other little tips and tricks in there that you want to try from their manual. But it does, for those of us who may, be a little uncertain about how to get the conversation started, it really gives us some nice language to use that. And very briefly, this was originally developed for veterans. And so, it's open sharing. There's no copyright because it was government funded, but I just wanted to highlight the robust impact that it does have on family involvement, where over half of those who were provided with Reorder began to engage actively in treatment compared to those in treatment as usual. And it was actually treatment as usual beefed up a little bit. So it was enhanced. There's already a strong baseline for family involvement. And so even still, Reorder really led to a high level of engagement for those loved ones and those individuals. So references, and you all know where to find me and how to find me if you have any questions, but you will receive the slides and the little guidebook. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it.